my dear friend,
G'day, how you going?
the Progress Piper, Mick. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you.
So yeah,
Been a-
yesterday we
Been a long
decided.
Friday.
Pardon me?
So it's been a long week, and I've been looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, no kidding, man. It's a news nightmare, and it's weird. I was reading that book, A Nightmare from Hell, before the Hamas terror attack, or whatever you want to call it. And then the book just dovetails right into that. So I've been on a media binge. It's been nuts. So anyway, we're going to talk about collapse. And I have a few articles that I shared with you. And I thought we'd just go through them really quick so that viewers can get an idea of what we're talking about, the frame that we're in. So it's kind of doomerism in a way, but it's also one of these face reality kind of moments, right? Come to Jesus. And so it might be an interesting way to look at things that's refreshing and different. It doesn't have to be depressing. And people will beg to differ with it. They'll decide that it's all not true and that all we need to do is have economic growth of 4% a year until the end of time, and everything in the universe will be great because we'll have Dyson spheres and starships and all kinds of great technology to take us to other worlds, so we can live in Elon Muskville on Mars and whatnot.
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah. So I'll start this screen share thing. So you can see that. All right. So this is the first article that I sent you or shared with you. It's called Overshoot: Why It's Already Too Late to Save Civilization. I thought it was kind of an interesting take on it. And of course, in the title, we know that. So overshoot is ecological overshoot. So it's overshoot to the point where we don't have the resources to sustain the kind of civilization that we have now, which is global, fossil fuel dependent, and requires a lot of materials for economic growth because we live in a global consumer society, and we have to build lots of products and services that need lots of energy in order to, live. Otherwise, we're all going to feel like we're poor and miserable and all that kind of stuff. So that's called the meta problem of our time. People call it the meta crisis and so on. So he's talking about the St. Matthew's reindeer herd. And this is just to give you an idea about what it means when you have an animal in a certain ecosystem that's eating everything, and it runs out of resources. It runs out of food because in the beginning, it's very lush and there's lots of food and tons of reindeer. So they put reindeer on this island in 1944 to help with some people who were manning a Coast Guard outpost. There were 29 reindeer. In 1957, there were 1,350 reindeer. And then eventually it ballooned on this limited island, right? So we live on a limited planet. I mean, our planet only has so much of everything. If we had the energy to go to the Earth's core and mine it for minerals and whatnot, we might have a fairly infinite supply, quote unquote, but it would take too much energy to do that. So probably not in the near future. So we have limited resources. And so the deer ballooned to 6,000 people, 6,000 deer. Then they collapsed in 1966. He went, and there were 49 reindeer left. So here's the graph: 42, 62 or whatever, and 66, it just crashes. So this is a typical graph that you see in these kinds of situations. And this is basically civilization. So we have economic growth as we know it today. It reaches a limit, and it's unsustainable. Bad things happen, and perhaps the human population will just dive. And when it dives fast and quickly. So it goes from 0 to 100 miles an hour very fast. And it goes from 8 billion people to 1 billion people very, very fast. At least that's what a lot of experts see. So that's what he's talking about, overshoot, and that human civilization, human beings and our activities are going to overshoot. That's exponential growth. An example of that, and you have that in the 80-20 rule in finance and a lot of other examples that normal people can understand. So here's look at the human population since the advent of agriculture. Okay, this is not even talking about oil and gas and coal, fossil fuels. So here we have 10,000 BC, there's 4 million people, they guess, right? I'm not exactly sure how they come up with that number, but I know it. They do it properly and scientifically. So then you have these populations going from 10,000 BC, 8,000 BC. It's all about the same until after 2,000 years BC. Okay, so before that we were hunter-gatherers, we were all migrants, we walked around the planet looking for good fishing grounds and good hunting grounds and good resources and environments in which to live. We didn't bump into mean tribes very much because there weren't that many people on the planet. There was no settled huge kingdoms or communities that were powerful at that time. And then we get around Babylon or whatever, some period, and we settle down and we start getting surpluses. Surpluses is a big deal because then you start hoarding things to get through the winter. And then you start hoarding things for the king and more powerful people. Hierarchies develop and so on. And the big dog in the hierarchy at this time, we come up with ideas about God and the gods. That's another story. So we're headed along, we're just getting up to, 0.5 billion almost when we get to here. And then suddenly it just goes up. You can see it just shoots up. So over the years, very few years, it goes from 600 million to 7.7 billion in 2019. So we're very successful. We figured out a lot of ways to do things. We came up with technologies. Writing was probably one of the big ones, keeping records for our hoards, our surpluses, language, rule of law, other things, not just the plow and using yokes, oxen and so on, horsepower and whatnot. So we're pretty smart. So the population bomb prior to 10,000 BCE, there were not so many people, and temperatures varied widely, and people would have to run around and gradually escape an ice age or whatever, because they came on very slowly. So until the 20th century, the average global temperature stayed within a range of 1 degree Celsius. And this era is known as the Holocene. So we had this stable era for a long time, 12,000 years, where we could develop all these technologies and develop civilization, kingdoms, right? Assyrians and Chinese and all these great civilizations around Egypt and whatnot. Slowly but surely, the human population be able to grow. It grows fast. By the 1700s, we go exponential. By 1800s, even more inventions come along, such as electric generators and incandescent lamps. And in the beginning of the 1800s, we were using cotton mills that were powered by water. And so you had to bring the labor to the water where the cotton mill was. So the laborers would come and they'd build a little village for the laborers to live in. So you were limited by how long you could make the laborers work. They might work 20 hours a day because they lived there by the water that was powering the cotton making machines. And then eventually they were able to move the cotton machines to the city where there was tons and tons of labor. And then they could come up with rules like only 10-hour work days. And then they could exploit the surplus labor. And then from here, you got all these different political philosophies and so on, Karl Marx and other people. And of course, before that, during the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, and so on. But that's an interesting thing, electric power, that motor, right? So anyway, you follow through this, you get to oil. Oil is much more adaptable and flexible. It has twice the energy density of coal. It's just an amazing thing. And with that, we grow even faster. Populations grow faster. We get automobiles, radios, airplanes, televisions, and here we are. 1967, Paul Ehrlich and his wife, Anne Ehrlich, both biologists, wrote a book called The Population Bomb. It warned that long before overpopulation would lead to worldwide famine, this seemed plausible as most of the world's best farmland had already been used, and the population growth rate had skyrocketed over 2% a year. Early editions of the book with the following statement: the battle to feed all of humanity is over. In the 1970s, hundreds of millions of people will starve to death in spite of any crash programs embarked upon now. At this late date, nothing can prevent a substantial increase in the world death rate. Of course, that didn't happen. The 1970s, we're still here. The population is still growing. When she wrote that, there was 3.5 billion people on the planet. There's 8 billion now. So we came up with all kinds of fixes, ammonia and fertilizers and nitrogen fixing and all kinds of technology to grow more and fish more and get more, farm more, industrial farming and so on. And this was called the Green Revolution in the 70s, and it was really big in India. The chemical fertilizers, big deal, phosphorus, ammonia, that's what I just said. And mechanized cultivation and harvest, high crop yields, and so on. Well, this can go on as long as we can do this, but without topsoil and other complex webs of life, it's not going to last. We're going to wind up. I don't know if there'll be a hydroponic revolution or aeroponic revolution where we get the nutrients to feed all this plants and animals that we need to eat, or we're just going to have a replicator. We're going to make food like on Star Trek. It just comes. It's atoms, man. It's atoms. So overshoot and collapse. Thanks to all of that, science, technology, engineering, and incredibly clever people, and the Enlightenment and great political philosophies and so on. Overshoot, the ecological basis of revolutionary change. That was written, and we talked of this idea of phantom carrying capacity. So there's this idea that the Earth has a carrying capacity, that we have enough renewable capacity to service so many human beings and other animals and life forms. And 8 billion people is completely dependent on fossil fuels. Nate Hagen's this great simplification talks about that all the time. And then we get to peak oil. Lots of people have read about peak oil. We don't know. Most people think we've already hit it. Well, that just means that it's going to require more and more energy to get oil out of wherever we're going to get it. So everybody knows this, and it seems like a mad dash to exploit everything before the end comes. And I always joke that, the really super smart players of the great game are just going to try to get everything they can get. And then somehow all the plebs and proles are going to die. And they're going to have lots of robot servants that can help them. Then they're going to turn the Earth into one big, huge country club for like half a billion people. And they're going to have a great time. And if they need help, they'll just go live with Mars on Mars for a while with Elon. It's this crazy optimism that they have. I'll go to New Zealand with my private army and I'll survive. So world population, energy use, and this is all the different energy that we use, more or less. And renewables is in this thing, but he talks about that, and he's saying the switch to renewables and all that isn't happening fast enough. A lot of people say that even if it did, it wouldn't matter, but he gets to that. So renewable energy, we need batteries, and for batteries, we need metals, lithium, cobalt, nickel. That's what you were talking about last video we made. The problem is new research suggests there simply isn't enough rare earth metals in the ground. So, and gas to keep growing food, we need this fossil fuel, to make everything, plastics, but in particular the Haber-Bosch process, which you can look up at this link. He's got great links in this article, so you'll learn a lot just by following the links. So that was the ability to derive ammonia from natural gas, and ammonia is used in fertilizer, and that was a big part of the Green Revolution that allowed us to go from 3.5 billion in the 70s to 8 billion now. About 50% of the world's food production depends on fertilizer that's created this way. So when it becomes too expensive to do that, we've got a problem. And you don't even have to talk about global heating, about droughts and all that. So we've painted ourselves into a corner, he says. So it's a degraded carrying capacity. And so overshoot, here's a graphic that shows what he means by the classical example of overshoot and degraded carrying capacity. The deer overgrazed to a point where the island could not support the deer than it could before an overshoot. So population growth, carrying capacity, overshoot, loss of carrying capacity. And this is all happening at once. So he mentions topsoil. This is huge. And you can't farm the way we farm and maintain topsoil. It destroys it, and it eventually just blows away and you have a dust bowl. 50 billion tons of topsoil has eroded. Erosion rate doubled in what is believed it's not sustainable anymore. Less than 60 years after which it will be nearly impossible to grow food, they're saying. Aquifers, water, they're disappearing faster than they can refill. So we're not going to have potable drinking water. It's just obvious. You just measure it. You look at the data. You figure out the various causes. This is all scientific. So he talks about the Ogallala aquifer from South Dakota to Texas, and it'll be gone in 20 years. So forests, people mistake forests for trees. You can plant a monoculture of trees. That's not a forest. A forest is a complex ecosystem. So we're losing forests. And when we lose the Amazon, some people think the Amazon might go before there's a blue ocean event in the Arctic. That means no ice in the Arctic. So it's just drinking up the heat from the sun. So we're using that up for lots of reasons. And of course, global heating will burn down more and more forests. Fisheries are really wrecked. And what's another thing that's going to destroy fisheries is the fish can't breathe in hot water. They have a certain temperature, a species of fish of water in which they can breathe. And if it's not the right temperature, they have to move, they have to migrate, go somewhere else, or they die. So 3 billion people rely on fish. That's 10% of the world's population. So good farmland and seafood, the oceans could be virtually empty of fish by 2048. One scientist was saying that I read, in the future, the ocean is going to have life in it, but it's going to be like this primordial goo of simple life form, you know, a single cell and whatnot. It's not going to be no mammals, no fish, you know. Of course, fossil fuels are being extracted far faster than they can replenish. So the low-hanging fruit has all been, you know, brought up and used and refined. Technology merely delays collapse. So he's thinking it's much more, scientists believe it's going to happen faster. Then there's this thing called Overshoot Day. And they look at the global footprint network. This is a great website. Earth Overshoot Day is a good website to look at. Civilization to continue functioning after July 28, it has to draw down resources that had accumulated long before humans came along. Resources like the ones mentioned above, topsoil, aquifers, forests, fisheries, fossil fuels, eventually they will all be gone. So if we grow like this, under this economic paradigm, with this many people, all of the things that we depend on will be gone. Not even to mention ecosystems, systems of life, complex systems of life in which we are embedded and part and parcel of that will disappear. So clearly we're an overshoot. So limits to growth, that was that book. How much longer until human population collapses? To answer this, take a look at the research conducted by MIT and published by the Club of Rome. Too many people think Club of Rome, Catholic, or George Soros or something. No, it was MIT academics who were looking at it. You know, it's not some conspiracy, it was a study. And they find out how much longer industrial civilization could last before running out of essential resources. So resources, industrial output, pollution, food, population. Once they had this idea, they had a World Tree model, and they went in and they did this whole thing. So I would recommend very seriously reading this book. This is on my Globe Hackers book recommendations page. I just bought it. I'm going to start reading it soon. And it's 50 years on from the limits to growth. What did we learn and what's next? So 50 years on, right? I mean, we just pedal to the metal. It's like accelerationism. We just want to go as fast as we can to the end and then see what may. Either God comes and does something, or it's our fate, or nothing can be done, or karma's a bitch, or however you want to look at it. Researchers compiled everything they used into that book, Limits to Growth. Upton Sinclair said, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. And this is a core problem in the world, because all the leaders in the world, they understand money and where to get it. Who gives them the funds? That's what they get, and that's it. That's all they get. So you can't expect them to do anything. And the scientists are dependent on the policymakers and the corporations that give them their budgets. So the do-gooders, the ones trying to help, are trapped by the very problem, the systems logic that's causing all of this, you know, and they need to get the money. So this Gay Harrington at Harvard said, given the unappealing prospect of collapse, I was curious to see which scenarios were aligning most closely with empirical data today. After all, the book that featured this world model was a bestseller in the 70s, a bestseller, this kind of book, and we did nothing. Continuing, and by now we'd have several decades of empirical data which would make a comparison meaningful. But to my surprise, I would not find recent attempts for this, so I decided to do it myself. Her master's thesis, she looked at factors like population, fertility rates, mortality rates, industrial output, food production services, non-renewable resources, persistent pollution, human welfare, ecological footprints, does all this stuff. You know, unless you're hundreds of years old, you have never lived during a time when the global population went down, ever. So that's an amazing thing. So now we get to climate change. So I don't think we need to talk too much about climate change because it's all in the news now. Whether you believe it or not, it's changing. People should know that by now. But that's a big thing. Coral reefs are having problems. Carbon sinks are disappearing like the ocean, the Amazon rainforest. Despite 30 years of COP summits and pledges by nations to slash emissions, things are worse than ever. In fact, in 34 years since scientists first testified to Congress, and you can remember people like Carl Sagan back in the day, about the dangers of global warming, we have emitted more greenhouse gases than in all of history before that. There you go. It's on the radar. We know it's a problem, and then we just go in and just exponentially emit more. So they think it's 1.2. This year it was over 1.5 because we had the hottest year on record ever. And I expect not even on record in the last 100,000 years. It was so hot. So this is out of control. I think, personally, I think the estimates of the temperature global mean is higher than most people want to admit. So it's bad. So accelerating collapse. This is the thing, you know, snow crabs dying, and you know all the climate change stuff. I won't go into that. So how did we get here? So most people refuse to believe that our civilization is unsustainable and headed for collapse in the near future. We just don't want to believe it. It's cognitive dissonance. We just can't wrap our heads around it. It wouldn't be any fun. You know, I'm not going to have a great time at the football game or the rugby match if I'm thinking about this stuff. So we just put it out of our mind, keep our heads down and work. What are we going to do anyway? Well, we could tell our leaders that if they're not about peace and solving these problems, they can fuck off, but not enough of us want to do that. So technology is not going to save us. So some people like me, when I'm creative writing, I'm talking about another hunter-gatherer future. But so here's another important point. Oops, okay, 10 minutes. All right. We'll stop and then start again after this because we're on the free version of Zoom. So here's another thing that's really important is sustainable growth is an oxymoron. Again, Nate Hagens is one of the best people to follow The Great Simplification if you want to learn about that, because he brings together all kinds of people that understand this. We can't have the kind of growth we have today, and it cannot be sustainable. So there are limits to growth. So we worry that the economy will collapse first and so on and so forth. We need to stop blaming each other and start working together. I always harp on that. I've thought about that for decades. We need to eliminate the idea that humans are separate from nature and remember that we are all part of nature. That's really important. So, you know, that's the first one. So far, so good. What do you think?
There's a lot to unpack there, and obviously, yeah, as you just mentioned, we'll have to come back for part two to discuss some of the issues raised that we have to confront if we were to have an honest conversation about this. And yes. I think that I don't think the conversation has been as honest as it needs to be, because our natural instinct is to nominate solutions, and it's our solution, not your solution, it's our solution that is the winner, and my solution is the one that's going to be the silver bullet, and if we just do this, we're going to, you know, we're going to reverse it all. And I think that sort of rhetoric and hyperbole is disguising what the true problem is. And obviously, to tackle any problem, whether it be alcoholism or personal growth, or indeed the health of the world, you need to actually be honest about identifying the true nature of the problem. And a lot of what I do for work is based on risk management. And so often people, in order to fix something, in order to make something safer, they inadvertently introduce a new hazard into the mix, which makes it just as bad or worse, but in a different direction. And I think that maybe we pause there and we'll come back and talk more about
so
that.
a couple more articles to show, and I won't go in as in depth as I did this time, because you can read those articles. But what I'd like to talk about is, what we think common people, ordinary people can do, if anything, to, just ease into it. And my biggest feeling is that the thing I really want people to think about, I just hope and pray, what else can I do? Is, when you're sick, you want support, you want peace, you want, somebody to take care of you, you want, to know that things are going to go on after you get well or when you die. And what we're doing now is just ramping up the whole global economy for war. And it's ridiculous. I mean, what we should be doing is learning about each other, learning how to appreciate each other, working together to find solutions, working together to find a consensus on what we can all agree on. Yeah, a rules-based order, if you will, where everyone on the planet can say, well, that's real, that's reality. We can't argue about that. And what you do over there in your corner of the world, culturally or whatever, that's up to you. We've got to be kinder and gentler to each other, as Bush once said. It's like we've got to find within our hearts to be better people, in our own lives. But I'm telling you, right now we're going in the wrong direction, and it's pretty damn horrific. I don't want to believe. Sometimes I think, well, this is probably just social media and all the information I consume, and it's not real. It doesn't matter, which is the consensus of most of the people I know. But it actually is, and it's in your face now. It's kind of hard to ignore it. 12 years ago or 15 years ago, I can understand why people used to think I was a nutcase for even talking about anything like this. Well, Stephen, you're an odd man. You're kind of funny. But, no one wants to be right about things like this. You're not screaming fire in a crowded theater. You're not Chicken Little. You're not crying wolf. It's the real deal. And you just wish people would pay a little attention.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead. We got 3 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I think that, like what I'd like to explore is being honest about the problem, and that it's multifaceted. And we have to admit that we are beyond solutions in some aspects. So now we need to mitigate. Now we need to prepare to protect ourselves from the inevitable, and work out exactly what are those things that we can start to fix, and maybe come to the realization that we need a mixture of approaches here, and that we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, not just yet.
Yeah, no way. We need the energy, technology, knowledge, data, science, information systems, sensors, all of that to help us have a softer landing. And we need to move our resources, our energy, our creativity, our corporate power, and so on in that direction. So the world, basically, common people have to just refuse to support the machine that's killing everything. So the omnicidal heat engine and its religious ideology, which is a political, sociological, and economic and cultural monster. We have to shift that, and that's the hard problem. You know, it's not consciousness per se. We're conscious because conscious, life because life, gravity because gravity, whatever. But culture, to shift that is a hard problem, especially when you don't control all the mechanisms of propaganda and power, global power, institutional power, corporate power, and so on. So human beings have to start talking to each other, and across culture, across nation states. I mean, that's why cosmopolitan polis salon. So you're going from the cosmic to the large community to the most intimate community, and trying to make connections across culture. So thanks a lot, my friend, and we will do this again soon, and then put them out fairly quickly because they all belong together.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a broader conversation than we can fit into half an hour.
Yeah.
But it's a conversation that needs to be had. It's definitely a conversation that we all need to start being a part of.
Yep. Thank you, my friend. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, mate.
All the best.